Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a second tape submission from Lauren G. I believe she's in Arizona. And she sent in a first video, and we took a look at it and gave her some ideas about how to move forward a little bit. And we're going to see what she does after having a little time to implement those things, which were basically just to get the horse more swinging. I believe I told her to sit up a little more herself, and which I still see here. You could still just lift your chest up a little bit and just let your position come up a little bit and lift yourself into the air. I mean, the correct position on the back of a horse should feel a little bit like yoga, where you're stretching your upper body upward so that we're not pressing down. Once again, the most important thing to remember is that we're trying to get the horse's back to lift up. So if we keep sitting straight in the saddle all the time, that means the pressure is going directly down into the horse's back. It can be very difficult when we're trying to teach a horse to lift its back. So very often, as we see here, he's beginning to get a little better. And so what we must do is lighten our seat a little bit. And usually what I like to do is either lift myself out of the seat a little bit by my stirrups, or lift my chest up and just displace my weight a little bit to the back, but by lifting up, not by sinking down into the saddle, so that I actually feel the seat lighten. I may even take a little weight onto the inside of my thighs a little bit so the pressure isn't just directly down on the horse's back. As I feel the horse form, that is, I always say, like, you feel the wave form underneath you. You feel the ball form underneath you. Then when you feel that beginning to swing through, then you just simply let yourself just sit that little bit forward so you're sitting exactly perpendicular to the ground. So try that occasionally, when you feel like he's getting a little stuck. Lift up instead of coming forward, and just lighten your seat a little bit by lifting back a little bit, and then send him on ahead of your legs and see if that doesn't get him swinging a little more. Then once again, as I said, as you feel the wave come up underneath you, just let your weight back down onto the horse. That's why we have to understand this whole idea of how we sit. What's gone so wrong with dressage in America is that people teaching it began to teach it like equitation, sort of similar to the hunter world, where you have the kids propped up over the neck of the horse, and they're kind of in this very exaggerated position out over the horse's neck with their backs very hollow and arched. That's a terrible position to ride a horse from. It's just the most ineffective position you could possibly be in, but it lets you jump fences when you don't know how to ride. So we want to stretch up and connect to the back, but we don't want to be taught that same way in dressage. So many people today teach by telling people to sit in this perfect position. Meanwhile, the horse underneath them is totally hollow. So if the horse's back is hollow, we don't want to sit directly down into that weight. We want to keep the saddle as light as possible on top of the horse, that is, so to speak, so that we give him room. So we're asking him to stretch down, just like in the contact. The trick to getting a horse to stretch is simply to keep steady contact, consistent, and simply have slightly more contact than the weight of the rein. The horse will look for how to evade that contact and will naturally seek to the ground. Then we simply lighten our hands as the horse seeks down to the ground. And once again, if you had displaced your weight, you would stretch, back up into the correct position straight on the back of the horse as you felt the back form underneath you. So that's a little bit more of what you need to do here with this horse, though this is looking much better as we're going, and I applaud your patience that you're taking here, of just patiently taking the time. In my view and in the classical view, you should never get out of the walk if the horse isn't relaxed and stretching through the top line in the walk. My general rule is if I can't get on a horse and stretch it, it usually means that its back is too stiff or too weak to be able to do that, and I will do groundwork instead, either work in hand or going all the way back to lunging and lunge the horse first, and then sometimes work in hand, sometimes even combining the two till I get the horse swinging over its back, and then I will get on. If I get on a horse and I feel like in 5 or 10 minutes I can't get it to lift its back and stretch, I know right away that he's probably not strong enough to do so. So I just get off and go back to the groundwork to help him understand what it is that I want without the weight up there. So once again, that's kind of the principle that you need to let you guide you a little bit when you're up there, to displace that weight off the center. So just lift yourself up and come back a little bit. But this is looking better and better as we go. Now I will say, of course, I have already watched through this entire tape once, and at the very, very end, she gets this horse into a really, really good place, which you'll see for just a moment. And once again, I applaud her patience to just patiently keep walking him through these exercises, and all of this will help you get there. Now he's starting to look better here. You see he's starting to swing. The neck is getting longer, and the step is becoming more regular there. She has moments where he really is trying to get there. And once again, at the very end, she gets him there. So if she can get him there, eventually she'll be able to get him there and keep him there all the time. But this is a typical horse, you know, as I always say, I don't need to see a horse go in the ring to tell you how it's been trained. I just look at how the horse is muscled. And when you see this horse closely, you know, you'll see that the horse has no top line. There's a, you know, quite a big dip behind the saddle there between the where the loin should be, where that should be all filled out. You know, a lot of people call what they see that like this, those little shortened, that little bump on top of the hips, they used to call that a hunter bump. Well, what that actually is a bad riding bump. It's from the horse never getting worked completely over his top line, his full length of stride, so that those muscles up on top of the hip there just become very short because they're never really working at their full length of stride. So this is exactly where she needs to be working with this horse, though I would still suggest that she continue with the lunge work, which I know she does because I saw her and she had him stretching quite nicely in the lunge work just without any halter on or anything. The main thing I would say is still on that lunge work what I saw before is he just needed to get moving a little more forward and swinging, and that's what we'll see when she first goes into the trot here, which will be coming up in a few moments, that he's just not like the walk here. It's just not quite swinging enough. Keep trying to get a little more out of it without slowing it down. Once again, we never try to force the head and neck into any kind of position. That's why once you understand that if you know how to ride, things like draw reins and Vienna reins and all of these gimmicks, you know, that are basically intended to give you more strength to force the horse's head down. If you know how to ride correctly, there's never any reason, and of course you would know how detrimental all those things are. Because if you force the head down, then you usually end up, which is what most of these horses end up, I can see this one a little bit, they get overflexed in the neck. So if you're having to force the horse's head down into a position with some kind of mechanical device, it always ends up badly for the horse and for the training in the long run. Because once the horse is broken in the neck, then we have a short circuit, so to speak, in our wiring where we're trying to get the horse to connect through its whole back. But this walk is looking much better. Once again, I commend her for how long she's taking to get this job done. You know, she's just taking her time and getting him longer and lower. Continue to try to swing him out. What you're doing is exactly right. Now here I see she's displacing her weight a little better with her upper body, so I like this a lot. And by virtue of that, she's also getting the horse to get out in front of her leg a little more, and that's exactly what we want to have happen. So he just swings through. So we never want to impede the front end. So the rule is when you're taking contact, you know, you must never let the contact of the rein destroy the gait. So if you touch the reins and the gait is degraded by that, you know, unless you want to slow down, basically we have to reapply the leg and loosen it. So when she starts into the trot here, you know, it's not terrible. He's getting pretty swingy over his back right there. That's pretty good. I just like to see her send him on. And the same thing applies in the rising trot here, that, you know, we have to keep ourselves up and back and not lean out over the horse's neck, because when the horse stretches, we want to be as if we are on top of a ball. So if we lean forward, just as if you were trying to stand on a ball, the ball will disappear out from underneath you. Same is true of the horse here. But he's starting to stretch here a little bit. He just needs to be a little bit more active. So I can't see whether you have a stick with you here or a whip, whatever, but he just could use a little more swing over his back, just a little more activity. But that was really coming very nicely. Not bad at all, just needed to encourage. You can ask for a little bit more there, so he just swings forward under the body a little more. And she comes back to the trot, and this even looks better here. He's getting longer through the neck, and we can also see with him, he probably somewhere along the way, he looks a little soft back there in the neck. That is, he's not always flexing at the pole, but a little further back in the neck. And once again, look at his conformation. It'll be wonderful to see this horse over a few more videos over time. I love to watch horses develop. You know, that's really what the joy of dressage is. It's like creating a living sculpture, and every day, you know, only you're adding to it rather than chipping away, hopefully, if you're doing it right. So that's kind of how one might look at it. If your young horse is kind of being chipped away, that is, all of a sudden you're seeing it sway back, and you're, you know, and these hunter bump, so to speak, is beginning to form, you know, as if parts of the horse are being taken away rather than added to. So it's kind of reverse kind of sculpture, more like clay, where we're adding things on, and of course what we're adding on is muscle, hopefully. And that will only happen if the horse gets swinging over its top line, the correct muscle. You can develop a horse's hind end to look kind of like a big butt, but if there's still a hole in front of that to the saddle, we know the horse isn't really working through the back. You know, very often people will talk to me about, oh, I'm taking my horse up and down hills to build up its back. Well, that's great if the horse works through its back. But if it doesn't work through its back, what you will do is build up the shoulder muscles and part of the hip muscles, but the wrong part. So everything we do, we have to start with the idea the horse must be working over its back for it to be effective for the horse and to have a quality result in the end that's going to last, once again, to help you make the horse last longer. Let's not forget what dressage is supposed to be all about. So once again here, I'd like to see her get this horse just a little more swinging, but this is not bad. I like the fact that it's calm. He still needs to get stronger, or rather slower and deeper yet as he will, but sometimes in order to get that, we have to go a little faster first, just kind of activate the back end and get it swinging and forward. But this is really quite nice, and it's coming along, and this will lead to something. There, she's beginning to get him to work a little bit more. So you can still see that's difficult for him. There he goes. He begins to get the neck out. But the right set of muscles is starting to look like it's working. Once again, look at the hock. As you study the horse in the trot, always look at the front and hind legs together. That's what people have to learn to do. Unfortunately, most people tend to look at the head and neck and the front legs. And that's how dressage sort of developed into what it has, where it's getting to be more like a gaited horse thing, where the horses are just throwing out their front legs with these exaggerated head and neck positions, which is not at all what we want. We always want to see the hind end and the front end swinging together on the same plane in the trot. So those diagonal pairs should look like they're moving exactly together. When we come back to the walk should be 4 beat and swinging over the back. Here it looks a little bit hurried, but you see, notice how the cadence of the walk, that is the rhythm, improves. The lower and longer she gets his head and neck, the more sort of normal and swinging looking like the gait looks. Instead of like all of a sudden the legs all look like they're beginning to swing in the same direction, that there's no hesitation time. So that's really what happens when we see horses that are hollow, and you can go to the Olympic Games tapes, you know, from the last Olympic Games and see many horses that you could put this this sort of gauge of correctness on, and you'd find that many of them are not achieving it. You know, when a horse is correctly collected, that is, it lowers behind, its hind leg still comes through on the same plane in the extended trot. That is, the hind leg extends through just like the front leg extends out. And when we see horses that are hollow, all they're doing is throwing the front leg out, which of course overstresses all the tendons in the legs and these kinds of things, and where we run into problems with dressage. If your dressage is done correctly, it should certainly minimize the damage to the horse and how much time you're spending, you know, with veterinarians, which is a sad thing today, as I see people spending more time with veterinarians than they're spending riding their horses because of the way they're being trained. Because that's what happens, you know, it's just like your car. If you take the shocks off of it and drive it for a while, a brand new car will fall apart in a year. That's what the shocks do. They not only make your ride more comfortable, but they protect the car in internal organs, so to speak, as its engine and all the rest of it. It will just rattle apart. And that's essentially what happens to horses. You know, when they don't have their shock absorbers over their top line, they basically rattle apart. The joints all go, and when you look at what's inside a horse's legs and how tiny all those little bones that have to support all this weight and all this pressure of having a rider and jumping over fences and all these things that we ask them to do, we must be sure that we do it in the best possible way, or, you know, we can't expect to last very long. This is looking quite nice in the trot here. There, she's beginning to stretch out, and the hind and front leg are swinging better. Once again, I think she could still just send him on a little more. Don't be afraid to ask for a little more activity now. As long as you don't conflict the front end, you know, with your hands, that should be just fine. Even if he's not perfectly stretched, you'll find it will lead to him stretching. Once again here, this just all needs to be, he just needs to get him much more active. But once again, I applaud how calmly she's doing this and how much time she's taking, and how she's keeping him working on big circles. She's not trying to do anything outside of the horse's scope of abilities. You know, she's not asking him to make suddenly 10-meter turns and things like this. And she's coming back to the walk again, which is very good. Now, eventually, we'd like to be able to get to the point where we could do all of our walk work before we go into the trot. And that will happen for you in the not-too-distant future. That is, we want him to the point where we can stretch him all the way down and out, like he is when we actually finish this tape. As you will all see, when he ends, he finally gets his neck about a foot longer than he has it right now. and that's where the tape ends. But point being is she got him there, and she continues to get him there every day. It will get longer and longer and lower. So we have to find the full expression of the horse's gaits. That is, we must find the full length of his top line. Most horses that have been badly trained are actually turtling their necks kind of back. They're pulling their necks back into the shoulders. Like this horse, in the very last frames that you'll see, his neck actually looks like it grows about a foot all of a sudden. And that's what we're looking for. We have to find that full range of motion in the horse that allows that whole top line to light up all at once, not just a little bit of it. And that's when we see the gaits really begin to improve and swing. Here the walk looks better again. Very nice. She comes back and getting him a little more swinging. Once again, it still needs to be more consistent and lower, but she's doing all the right things, especially for someone just trying to learn this. I mean, the most commendable thing is she's not getting frustrated with the horse, which so many people do, is they don't realize that, you know, it takes years to develop these techniques. That's why, you know, riding started being dumbed down for people. People have always known that, you know, dressage was always considered the, you know, high school. It was the highest level of riding that was, you know, should only be entered into by those who were very serious about it, you know, and are willing to take the time to study it, just as if you wanted to be a doctor or some such as that. You know, anybody can learn to put a Band-Aid on a finger, but, you know, doing open heart surgery is a whole other thing. Well, the same thing is true of riding horses. I mean, that's, for instance, why I grew up fox hunting and was even the joint master of a hunt for a while myself. And, you know, you'd notice that the staff out in the hunt, and the professionals who rode for the people usually who owned the horses, would ride the horses beautifully out of hand and wouldn't ride in standing martingales and that sort of thing. But, you know, it's much better if a person isn't an expert rider. They are much better off just putting the horse in a standing martingale and leaving the mouth of the horse alone and riding it forward and not trying to put the horse in a frame than, you know, than trying to do so and not knowing how. Because that's what's led to so much damage in, you know, what we call so-called dressage today, is that, you know, basically people started trying to do this without the knowledge and the information that they needed. I know I was the same way. You know, I studied with everyone I could find to study with in America, and I always came away frustrated. And while I was competing at a very high level, you know, it just never felt right to me. But I kept reading the books of the classical masters, and I would meet instructors who seemed to have those words. They would use the words that came out of the books, but then it always ended up just a fight, you know, to pull the horse's head down at the end of the day, no matter how beautiful their words were they may have spoken throughout the course of the lesson. So it wasn't until I went to Nuno Oliveira's and got on one of his horses, and the first time I felt one, you know, it was just such an amazing feeling. And then I remember the first time he let me do a levade on one of his horses, it was just the most amazing feeling of the horse lifting through its back, and the light bulb just went off in my head. You know, obviously this is it. Now look how lovely this horse is starting to stretch here. That's more what we're looking for. So once again, look how pleasant he looks there, and look how much better the trot looks. That's really, really good. That's much better. Look how much more swinging. In the beginning of this tape, if you went back and compared where she started to where she is now, you know, the back end would basically look like it was dragging along behind it. That was really commendable right there, and a huge improvement of what we saw a few moments ago. And he comes back to the walk. That's very normal. And once again, at this stage of training, you don't want to worry about the transitions. People get all hung up about whether they're able to do a perfect transition. You'll never be able to get good transitions until the horse seeks the contact and stretches into the contact with the bit. That's what makes everything work. So until you get that, you should just be doing very simple, as I tell my students all the time. I don't care if it takes you, you know, 20 times around to bring the horse to a walk, if it does it smoothly and steps forward into the walk. I never want anything to be abrupt. So this is also part of the thing. You'll often see dressage riders when they're going to halt, and they cram their weight down into the horse as if they were doing a sliding stop, and we see it freeze the back end of the horse. Well, that is not how you do a correct halt. If you have a horse working up to its back, all you do is stretch up and slow the motion of your back, and the horse will step right up underneath you because its back is up. But if you suddenly cram your weight down into the horse, you know, a la a Western rider trying to do a sliding stop, I mean, that's what they do. They do that, and the back end freezes. That's how they get the horse to slide. Well, dressage riders I see very often are doing the exact same thing, and then they wonder why the horse doesn't halt straight. So then they get in a big fight with the horse about trying to get it to step up underneath them in the halt, and that just turns into another fight that ends up confusing the horse even more. So halts should never be done with horses at this stage. They should never be practiced other than as slow as they need to be. That is taking all your time to go through the gaits, like trot back to walk, take 10 strides of the walk and let the horse come into a walk. So until the horse is consistent in its contact and will stretch into the contact and then be able to find its working trot, that is after the stretch, how high can we bring the head and neck without losing that trot? That's our working trot. So that was a good working trot for this horse today. That was really good, and it's gotten even stretchier as we've gone along here. Very well done. I look forward to seeing more from her in the future. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Now look how lovely his neck is starting to look there at the end. Great job.